Hey Rose, did you read 26 books in 2020 like you set out to do at the beginning of the year? Haha! No! But I did read quite a few, so we're gonna go in chronological order. Let's go. The first book I read in 2020 was The Siren by Kiera Cass. Oh, Kiera Cass. The main character is a siren named Colum, and she, with her sisterhood of other sirens, sings people into drowning themselves in order to feed the ocean, with a capital O, she's a character, who needs to eat people in order to sustain the earth. For some reason. And then she falls in love with a human guy, which is forbidden, and it's all very underwhelming. There are so many opportunities for, like, tension, drama, conflict, and none of them are taken. Can I spoil something that doesn't happen? Her love interest never finds out that she's a siren and that she's killed hundreds of people. On top of that, the characters are so bland. How can you be an immortal creature based on Greek myth that sings people to their deaths and still be as boring as Colin? The romance is really forced, the characters have no personalities, everything turns out way too easily for the characters. But if you think this is gonna stop me from reading Kiera Cass's next series, you are sorely mistaken. Why, you ask? Look how pretty they all are. One day I'll be mature enough to get rid of books that I don't like simply because they have pretty spines all lined up together, but they're so nice. Next up is The Foxhole Court, The Raven King, and The King's Men by Nora Sakavic. I'm cheating for two reasons. One is that I haven't read these all at once. I read The Foxhole Court at the beginning of the year, and as of today, which is December 31st, Raven King is the most recent book I read, and I technically haven't finished King's Men, but I'm going to finish it today. This is a self-published series called All for the Game, and it revolves around a team of Exy players. Exy is a made-up sport, and the members of the Foxes, which is our Exy team, all of the team members on the Foxes have tragic, rough backstories, and you know what that means. Edgelords. The main character, Neil, is so damaged and edgy and independent to a fault and really smart and yet so dumb. I love him. And he's been alone for so long that he struggles with relying on other people and acclimating to his newfound family, but the character development! Make no mistake. These books are not well written. Kat from Paperback Dreams has a really good comprehensive review of this series, and I will steal two of the excellent points that she makes. One is that the whole series feels like fan fiction of another better series that doesn't exist, and two is that it deals with very sensitive topics in not so sensitive ways, so be warned. That being said, digitally the first book is free and the remaining two books cost $1 each. I paid $2 for 3 books. With that factor in mind, I don't judge these books too harshly. Some other ebooks I read were Eclipse, The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner, and Breaking Dawn by Stephenie Meyer. I'm trash. We all knew this already. I started reading Twilight when I was in high school. I got through 70% of Eclipse, and I didn't touch it for 5 years. So I read the remaining 30% this year, but 30% of a Twilight book is like 200 pages, so I'm counting it. All I can say about Eclipse is fuck Jacob. He's even worse in the book than he is in the movie. As for the Bree Tanner book, I bought it back in high school and I regret the purchase. It took me like an hour and 45 minutes to read the entire thing. And then there's Breaking Dawn, which cemented Charlie Swan as the greatest character in literary history. The Cullens go to him after Bella's become a vampire, and they're like, Charlie, your daughter is somehow no longer a walking disaster, and the child that she had a month ago is now 4 years old. The world is not quite what you thought it was, and that's really all we can tell you if you want to maintain contact with your only family. And he's like, shit, man, sign me up. As for the climax of the book, dear God above. I have to give props to the filmmakers for making a fake climax to that movie, because at least we got to see a battle at all, see people die even if it wasn't real. But in the book, we don't even get that. Stephenie Meyer just hates writing action despite including lots of it in her fiction. You spend all this time building up this tension, building up this army of vampires and werewolves. There's so much gloom and doom for the days leading up to the battle. You've got Bella, who has only had, what, a few months of vampirism, marriage, motherhood. She thought she was gonna have eternity to enjoy these things, and now it's all being taken away from her. But she is ready to die. She is ready to sacrifice everything in order to give her daughter a chance of escape. And where does all that buildup go? Literally nowhere. You've got these two armies ready to duke it out, and then Alice pops up, and she talks to Aro, and then Renesmee puts her hand on Aro's face, and then Aro kills someone you don't care about, and then it's over. They fuck off back to Italy, I guess. The ending is really cute when Bella figures out how to push her shield away so that Edward can read her thoughts, and she just thinks about him, and he finally sees how she views him, and then they kiss, and it's really sweet. Supermarket by Bobby Hall, aka Logic. I don't really listen to rap. I don't think I've ever heard Logic's music, and I most certainly did not have a bias in his favor while reading this book. I read this because of fellow YouTuber Gabby DeFino, who was talking about monthly favorites or a monthly book wrap-up of some sort, and she said that this was one of her new favorite books, and that if you want to read it, you shouldn't look at a summary of it because it kind of spoils what it's about, and that you should just go out and buy it and take the plunge. And what I have to say to that is, I'm not trying to insult Gabby's taste by any means, I just don't think the summary is gonna spoil all that much. Largely because in the first chapter, the main character Flynn goes to a supermarket for a job interview. And before the interview even starts, he punches his would-be manager in the face for no reason. So you're like, whoa, what's this guy's problem? Then it's revealed that this altercation is all just an intense daydream that Flynn is having while he's in the manager's office being interviewed. So there were no punches to be had. So then you think, oh, okay, this guy's not completely alright upstairs. This must be what the book is about. And you would be correct. And yet it felt like this book was trying to outsmart me, even though I could see every twist coming from a mile away. I really don't want to give too much away, but it's trying too hard to be Fight Club. And the writing style is just, I am already flipping to the page because I feel like you're not gonna believe me unless I tell you. Okay, this is actually chapter 1. I thought it was the prologue, but whatever. His lips stained the butt of the cigarette, like the lipstick of a single mom driving an Astro van in the 90s to pick up her 5th grade son from soccer practice. Poofy hair and shoulder pads. You know the one. What? Moving on. Next up we have She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb. You know, as I was reading this book, I thought, wow, this book sure is depressing. This main character sure is unlikable despite the metric ton of sympathy that they've garnered from me from having a shitty life. Oh hey! Wally Lamb also wrote I Know This Much Is True, which is one of my favorite books. Something I've noticed about Wally Lamb's writing is that he really loves to put his characters through the ringer. If I were to quantify and also qualify the amount of things that Dolores and Dominic have respectively been through, I don't know who's had a shittier life. There's a part in this book where the main character Dolores stays in a psychiatric hospital because of the aforementioned shitty things that she's been through, and I wish that the rest of the book could have just been that, and it could have been her actually processing her trauma and recovering from it, because it would have made the book shorter and a lot less painful. Instead, she leaves the hospital prematurely and ends up with this guy who is just the epitome of everything wrong with the male gender. I know that there are men out there who are actually like it, but he felt like a caricature. He felt like his entire purpose was to make Dolores miserable, and she's miserable enough. Her name is Dolores, for Christ's sake. That wasn't done on accident. Oh, I forgot to mention that Gabby DeFino and I actually read this book together because she read I Know This Much Is True because of my video from last year, so I think we were both equally overwhelmed by it. Letters to a Young Writer by Colum McCann. It's one of my many nonfiction books about writing, and to be honest, it's not all that memorable. The one piece of advice that I remember is not to publicly say negative things about other people's work. Whoops. Oh, look! She was reading The Bell Jar! I read this at a pretty not optimal time for my mental health, but it didn't make it any less of a worthwhile read. It's The Bell Jar, it's magnificent, it deals with important issues. What is there to say that hasn't already been said? My Father the Pornographer by Chris Offut. In no way related to the British podcast My Dad Wrote a Porno, by the way. This is a memoir about the author's father, Andrew Offut, who wrote many a pornography back in the day. And when he died, he left his eldest son, Chris, his entire collection of pornography. Everything that he'd ever read, written, watched, listened to, looked at, etc. Chris was an author before this book, and he tells the story of when he published his first novel and he called up his dad to tell him. And apparently his dad went really silent, and Chris was like, "What's wrong?" And Andy apologized, and Chris said, "Why are you apologizing?" And Chris said, "Because I didn't realize I'd given you a terrible enough childhood to make you become a writer." And because it's at the very beginning of the book and I wasn't privy to knowledge of Chris's upbringing, I was like, oh, haha, that's a funny observation about writers. And then I read the rest of the book and I was like, oh yeah, Chris did have an awful childhood and it is largely Andrew's fault. Towards the end of the book, after Chris has reconciled with a somewhat palatable version of what his father was like, he comes across this selection of comics. It's Andrew Offut's hand-drawn comic series, never published, drawn in Crayola marker, solely for his own eyes, and it is pure torture porn. It's mainly about female characters getting I was gonna describe one of the torture methods, but it was just too gruesome. And in Andy's diary or something, or in the footnotes of this very comic, you can see Andrew having this existential crisis, like, oh my god, do I hate women? I thought I wrote porn because I loved women. Well, Andy, you treat your wife like garbage and you told your daughter that you wish she and her sister had never been born, so I don't really know what to tell you. Into the Spotlight by Carrie Fletcher. I was so excited to read this book, to make a video about it, to do a little bit of ranting. I read it and I didn't feel very passionately about it in a negative or positive way. It was fine. I found the characters more relatable than I expected. I think the children's genre definitely suits Carrie's whimsical, simple style. And it's definitely the best of her books so far, but that's not saying much in my opinion. Saga of the Swamp Thing by Alan Moore. Again, I'm cheating because I've only read the first two, but I'm gonna read these four before I go back to school, and I'm not gonna talk about them again in my 2021 wrap-up, whatever, so here they are. Also, yes, I know, the DC Vertigo thing, it's uneven. This one doesn't have the DC thing, and it's squished. I know. Also, it's the only one that I didn't buy brand new, and you can definitely tell. Anyway, Swamp Thing. Oh my god. I was not prepared for how mind-blowing this series was gonna be. The writing is just phenomenal. It's got so much to say about human nature. It's so beautiful and haunting and horrifying and existential. And I told as much to my friend Jay, who's also read the series. I probably said those exact words verbatim, in fact, and he was like, yeah, the way Alan Moore writes, it's just biblical. And I was like, that's exactly it. I don't know how he does it. I don't know how his brain works to produce something like this. Without a doubt, one of the best works of fiction that I have ever consumed in my entire life. The writing is so lyrical and profound and yet not pretentious at all. It comes from a place of such sincerity. I'm just in love with Swampy. A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. Dear Hank Green, how in the fuck? How in the fuck do you write something like this? This is the sequel to an absolutely remarkable thing, and it just... it knocked my expectations out of the park. It's terrifying, and yet so captivating and uplifting. I just... The Green Brothers, man, they are something else. Deadpool Classic Volume 2 by Joe Kelly. If you couldn't tell by Swamp Thing, I wanted to get a little more into comics this year, and I thought Deadpool would be a good, funny, engaging, entertaining character to start off with. I did plenty of research, and I figured that the classic volumes were a good place to start, except you're not supposed to read the first volume because that's when Deadpool is a ripoff of Deathstroke from the DC universe. I liked this a lot, and I'm excited to get more into the series. The Elements of Style by William Strunk Jr. and E.B. White. You know, I'm always looking at these lists of best books to get if you want to improve your writing skill, and this is pretty much always in every single one of those lists, or at least it used to be a few years ago. One article even said that reading any other book on writing before this one was like reading Christian literature and never reading the Bible. And what I have to say to that is... It teaches a valuable lesson in omitting needless words, hence why it's so short, and it teaches a lot about grammar, so maybe it's good if you're a beginner, as opposed to me, the professional. But yeah, I wasn't as impressed with this as I expected to be. What Playwrights Talk About When They Talk About Writing by Jeffrey Sweet. This is a compilation of interviews that Jeffrey Sweet conducted with various playwrights, such as Christopher Durang and Lenford Wilson. The foreword says something like, despite being individual interviews, you can imagine the most prolific playwrights of the last century sitting around a table together, discussing, arguing about the craft. And I was like, okay. But the more I read it, the more it actually became like that. I guess because Jeffrey Sweet asked a lot of the same questions for every interview. Like, I get it, okay? British plays are about the state of the nation, American plays are about the state of the family. Got it. But it is really interesting to see one playwright say, oh, all of your plays should be different and you should never do the same thing twice, whereas another playwright says, you need to do the same thing over and over and over. This does have some pretty top-notch advice from some of the greatest playwrights in Western theater, so I honestly recommend this one. Choke by Chuck Palahniuk. This is about a man named Victor who had a terrifying childhood because his mother was very mentally ill and also a criminal, so every time she escaped prison or just got let out of prison, she would find him in his foster homes and just keep kidnapping him and taking him for joyrides. And now it's years later and his mother lives in a geriatric facility, and in order to pay for her care, Victor has devised this plan where he goes to restaurants and he pretends to choke on food. And then the people who save him tend to adopt him as their greatest accomplishment in life and keep in contact with him, send him money when he needs it, etc. He's also a sex addict, which is fun. Because of these things, he believes himself to be an inherently bad person, but there are points in the book when he grapples with the idea that he might actually be good, and that's super interesting to see. Also, there are some great twists and turns in this book. Last, but most certainly not least, we have Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. You thought we were done with Twilight. Ho, bitch, you thought! Before I really get into this, can we just take a step back and think about Stephenie Meyer's thought process when she announced the impending release of this masterpiece? Picture this, okay? You are Stephenie Meyer. You are a Mormon multimillionaire. Every day you wake up, you take a shit, and you wipe your ass on a death threat written by a 12-year-old. As you're drinking a cup of tea brewed from the tears of the Harry Potter fandom, you decide to take a scroll through the news. It occurs to you that the world is in chaos, the pandemic is ravaging the globe, people are losing their jobs, they're getting sick, everything's just on fire. And you think to yourself, I know what the world needs. Edward Cullen. The world needs the book you've been cock-teasing your own fandom with for over a decade! Midnight Sun is Twilight from Edward's perspective, and it is truly the cure for what ails ya. There's some cute little insights throughout. You find out that Edward helped Ben get together with Angela because he wanted to indirectly thank Angela for just being a good, genuine friend to Bella. It's the best thing he does in the entire book because Angela deserves the world. There's this part when Edward and Bella first get together and he's asking her a million trivial questions about herself. And in Twilight, Bella describes this as, he spent the day asking me insignificant questions, and that's really all we get. Whereas in Midnight Sun, we get every single question and answer because to him, this is vital information. He literally asks her Coke or Pepsi, and that is dialogue that we get to read. She prefers Dr. Pepper, by the way, if you wanted to be privy to that essential knowledge. Woo, those are all the books I read this year. I don't know how many I'm gonna read in 2021, man. I mean, fuck. But thank you very, very much for watching. I love you. Bye-bye.